One of the most popular openings for the last 150 years or so is called the Ruy Lopez, or the Spanish opening, and it starts out with pawn to e4, black follows pawn to e5, knight attacks the pawn and develops, and the black knight goes to c6, defending this e5 pawn, and white immediately goes to work on that knight, trying to use the remove the defender idea to capture the knight and allowing this knight to capture this pawn. Well, that's the idea anyway. But in practice, they discovered that if the scenario plays out, and let's say black actually prompts the bishop to capture the knight, let's just look at that for a moment. And now here's a situation where you violate the principle of capturing towards the center with the pawns. To strengthen your center, you actually take away from the center, and if the white knight captures the pawn, the black queen can slide here, attacking both undefended pieces, the knight and the pawn, and actually get the pawn back, and this ends up not being bad for black. So white does not capture after this prodding of the bishop here, and he usually backs off, maintaining the tension. You know, the idea of tension in chess is very, very important. So like if your pieces are attacking, wherever there's engagement of pieces, it creates a certain tension, and your idea is to apply more pressure on those points. And then you only release that pressure through captures if you actually gain something, if you gain material, or if you gain a positional advantage or some strategic goal that you're trying to accomplish. This sequence of moves where the bishop backs off to a4 is actually a variation, a subline of the main Ruy Lopez. It's called the closed defense. And the line where the bishop takes the knight and pawn takes is called the exchange variation, with this exchange of material here at c6. In this variation, white has accomplished the doubling of the pawns here, and he'll try to win the endgame. He'll try and go into an endgame as quickly as possible and use this weakness, the only weakness in the position, to try to win the game. So the game might continue. It often continues this way. d4, and if e takes, queen takes, trying to prod the queen to exchange, and queen takes, knight takes, and white is hoping to win this endgame. All things being equal, which is what I think is the main caveat of chess, just this one weakness in black's position, or if white had a similar type of structural weakness. We looked at the different types of pawn weaknesses in a king and pawn endgame. Well, that's enough to compromise one side because this pawn can't be defended by pawns now. So this king is always relegated to having to watch out for this weak structure over here, and then white can run around and try and create some other weaknesses or win some pawns on the other side of the board. And that's a very common strategy in chess. And if we don't go down the exchange variation, let's back up a bit here. And the bishop, instead of taking, backs off, and then knight plays to f6, attacking this pawn. White can castle, and if black takes this pawn, we slide over with the rook, and we'll be able to regain the pawn with various scenarios. Let's say he runs, and then the knight can take, and there are 2 against 1 here, and that's why he can regain it. And that's called the open defense. And there are other ways of playing that variation as well. There are other moves that can be made in these variations. And the last one we're going to look at is going down this path called the Chigorin Variation. Let's back up here a bit. And so when the bishop backs off from this, and black can continue with knight to f6, and we castle, and instead of taking the pawn, black develops instead The white rook slides over, defending the e4 pawn. And then now black hits the a4 bishop with b5. The bishop runs, and now black defends this e5 pawn with pawn to d6. And white prepares to hit the center again with pawn to c3 and then pawn to d4. And it also gives the bishop an escape square here, a bolt hole, because we'll see shortly the knight will attack it. Black castles. And now white plays pawn to h3, preventing this pin by the bishop. Otherwise this bishop could come here and pin. And in this line they've worked out that it's best to prevent that. There are lines where they allow it. And the knight to a5 attacking the bishop, and this is the beginning of the Chigorin variation. All very complicated stuff, but with logical ideas behind them. You know, still trying to control the center and trying to increase their piece activity. Now let's look at a game played by a couple of masters recently, where white gets everything he wants, and we're going to pick it up here near the Chigorin defense. So instead of knight playing here in this line, black decided to play rook to e8. And now white hits the center, trying to hit this e pawn, and grab some more space over here. The bishop backs off. The knight slides up, getting into the action. The bishop develops. You've got to get all your pieces into play, all else being equal. If your opponent hasn't given you anything, a tactic or something to win right away, you got to develop all your men, unite your rooks, pawn to h6. And now white attacks this knight, grabbing more space in the center. The knight runs. The knight slides over here. So white is going to deploy his pieces over to the king side. Now that the center is locked up, that usually focuses play on one side or the other of the board on the wings. The knight slides in, trying to get back into the action here. Queen slides up for possible. Well, she wants to deploy to the king side, and also maybe some possible errors by black here with the knight, because this bishop's going to open up. Tactics that are going to emerge. Everything in chess is an immediate attack or a preparation down the line. Knight slides over, maybe to attack the queen here. Open up this pawn. Allow the other black queen to get into play. Knight slides over to get him into this action. He sees some squares that are available to him. This f5 square, in just 2 moves. You know, a lot of things that happen in chess at very high levels really take place within 1, 2, and 3 moves. Okay, so this pawn stops any action on these 2 squares that we looked at earlier. The knight slides over to g4, and now he's got 2 attackers on this pawn, the bishop and the knight, only defended once by the black bishop. So the queen slides over and defends this pawn 2 times. Now he starts attacking on the queen side, right? He tries to break up these pawns over here. Now the knight slides over and attacks the queen. The queen runs, defending this pawn as well, although it was defended by the rook once. The knight takes, because there's a tactic, a pawn fork, which we looked at in the beginner section, one of the tactics. Pawn to f5. So now the knight's going to be a gunner. Likely be a gunner. Let's see, unless white has something up his sleeve here. If he can have a superior counterattack. Queen backs off. But the knight is lost. But, oh no, the queen takes this pawn with check. That was a big oversight on black's part. And the bishop blocks the check. The knight gets into the action, is going to swing in here or here, putting 2 attackers on this bishop, 3 attackers on this pawn. Black is going down, folks. The rook tries to get into the action here. And now this bishop unites with the queen, forming a battery. There's a check here. The rook attacks the queen. The queen throws in the check. The king runs. The knight goes to f5, and now we have a mating threat here. So there's a fork that has taken place here. Do you notice the other piece that's being attacked? The queen. Well, clearly, black did not see that, but he's probably very short on time. When you play with the clock and your time starts running down, you don't have enough time to look at all the moves, and you can blunder. Blunders are a big part of chess. It's hard not to blunder. So he didn't see this, actually. And white grabs the queen, and it's game over. And he resigned at this point. So he was probably short on time, as I said. But that's part of the game. So this is one of thousands of games that have been played with the Ruy Lopez opening.